You wanna go, you wanna leave. So baby, come and get away with me. You wanna... What's up? My name's Justin Padilla, and I'm here to talk today about my testimony. I was born and raised in Cheyenne, Wyoming, 1983. So right now I'm currently 35 years old. I grew up, my mother's name is Christina Padilla, and I grew up without a father. She had two sisters, Darlene and Joanne, and she also had four brothers. Talleray was the oldest, and then it was Daniel, and then Gary and Ronnie. My grandpa's name was Joe Padilla, but his full name is Telesforo Joe Padilla. He's from he's a Spaniard descent. And my grandma is Maria Padilla. Her original last name was Baca. She's from Mexican descent. And so I also have a brother named Shiloh Padilla. He's 6 years older than me. So we're gonna go back in time. Probably, talk about my childhood when I was growing up. So pretty much we grew up in a poor household. It was just my mother taking care of me and my brother. My brother's dad wasn't in the picture, and neither was my dad, so I didn't know my dad at an early age. But growing up in Cheyenne, Wyoming, it's kind of like a cold part of the country. There's mountains around there. Pretty small town, about 70,000 people. So when we grew up, my mother, she was working for Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's an insurance company. She didn't make that much money working there, but that was her job, and she had to support me and my brother. My grandpa was pretty much my father figure. I always looked up to him, and he was pretty much the backbone of the family. He was split up with my grandma at the time, when I was growing up. They got a divorce when I was really young, so I didn't really know anything. As I was a young kid, maybe around 6, 7 years old, my grandma lived in Phoenix, Arizona with my youngest uncle, Ronnie Padilla. They lived out in Phoenix. And my uncle Talleray, he was locked up in prison when I was young. And I didn't know what for. I was just told he was in prison. My uncle Gary, he started working for the railroad. And my uncle Daniel, he was pretty much working construction or just whatever good jobs he could find around Cheyenne. So my grandpa bought 2 houses downtown Cheyenne. And he bought 2 of them, and he gave one house to my mother, and so my mother moved in one house with me and my brother. And then next door, my grandpa lived in the other house. He bought the other house for him. And my grandpa lived in that house with his girlfriend. Her name was Lori. And she had a daughter, and she claimed that her daughter was actually my grandfather's kid. But we don't really know the truth to this day. It's still up in the air. We don't know, because there was never any blood test done or anything like that. So, but growing up, that's who I had around. My grandpa was always there for me, and my mother, she was always there. She was always working everything to support us the best she could. But it was kind of a weird lifestyle, because when I was growing up, we grew up poor, but I didn't really know the difference. I didn't know the difference between rich people, poor people, or what. I just thought, this is life, so I gotta make the best of it. And so going on about my life, my grandfather, he would always teach me how to work on houses, how to paint, how to do drywall, how to do a lot of different stuff. And he was he was pretty much like his own boss, like an entrepreneur kind of. He owned apartment complex with 15 units in there, 5 or 6 houses, and then he had his own businesses. He had a business called Joe's Masonry, so he would do brickwork and block work around Cheyenne, Wyoming for whoever wanted that type of work. And he would do even other odds and ends stuff, painting, just whatever kind of jobs, you know. And but he carried himself in a different way, you know. A lot of people respected my grandfather. He was pretty much a man of power, you know, and not just in a money sense, but also his persona. He had a good amount of muscle on him. You know, he knew how to talk. He was fluent in Spanish and fluent in English. Like, to the point he knew both languages so well. It was, you know, him just speaking English, you know, you're like, well, he speaks English pretty good, but then he'd turn to someone else and speak Spanish and he'd be fluent. So it's just like, man, this guy's well versed, you know, and he knows what's going on. He always knew how to communicate real well to people, and he always held himself well. But I knew some things were weird, but that's just the way he was. Like, we would go to the bank and he would wear like an old pair of painter pants, and like the back pocket, you know, there was just strings holding his wallet in there. But his wallet was real big and fat, you know, there was thousands of dollars in that wallet. And then he'd be wearing a jacket, and the jacket would have a big old rip in the back and stains on it. And it's just like, you know, you look from the outside and you would say, a guy with money like this, you know, would be wearing nice clothes. But he wasn't really interested in wearing a lot of nice clothes. He was just interested in having money for his family and just living a normal life and being able to do whatever he wanted whenever he wanted, kind of deal. So I thought that was really weird. So growing up, you know, I got into sports a lot. I would play outside. I got into baseball, and I was pretty decent at baseball. I played Little League baseball for 6 years. Got on the all-star traveling team, and we traveled out of around the state a little bit to play some baseball games. And then I played 1 year of Babe Ruth baseball. That's when I was 13 years old, so 7 years total. And we took a championship away that year. I played pitcher and shortstop were my main positions, and sometimes second base, stuff like that. And, you know, it just wasn't with baseball. We'd play all different kinds of sports. You know, when I get off of school or whatever, me and my buddies, we'd go down and play basketball for 2 hours easily, 3 hours easily. You know, just hooping it up and stuff. And so was my brother and his friends, and he was 6 years older than me, so we kind of always want to hang around him and his buddies, you know, because we're the young guys, and that's just the thing to do when you're young. You want to see what the old guys are up to. So, you know, growing up like that is just a different lifestyle. I was focused a lot on sports and stuff like that when I was really young. And so that's like from 6 to 13. Well, when I was about 8 years old, I got involved in the Catholic Church, and I wanted to. One of my other buddies was serving as an altar server, so I decided I want to do that too. You know, I was real interested in what other people were doing, and I wanted to try it out too. So I became an altar server, and I done that for 5 years, just where you go down to church and you carry the candles and hand the priest the books and whatever, you know. But, you know, and that's right around 13 years old. Right around 13 years old, 12 years old, and, you know, I started following my brother. My brother was living, he wasn't a goody two-shoes or nothing like that. He was like, just done whatever he wanted to do. He got involved with some other guys around the street, and they started a gang called East 18th Street. And you think a small town like that, gangs, but yeah, you know, they started their own gang, and And there's a few gangs around the town, and they'd be fighting rival gangs and doing all kinds of stupid stuff and having house parties, and there was always like talk of, this other gang's calling, and they said that they're gonna come by and do a drive-by, and sometimes other gangs did drive by, but they didn't shoot or anything, but we'd turn off all the lights and get down, because you never know, kids are stupid, they do dumb stuff back then. And this, when I was 13, that was like probably right around 95, somewhere in there. I was born in 83, so it puts it right around 95, 96, somewhere in there. But that's what happened when I was 13. My brother was involved with these gangs and stuff, and we used to hang out with my brother, because we wanted to be cool just like them. And I remember one night, we would go play basketball, my brother and his friends, and I'd go play basketball too. And we all went down to the YMCA this one night, and one of my brother's friends was talking, like trying to punk this dude in the weight room, and this dude in the weight room was all muscled up. He was like a big bodybuilder kind of guy. He was pretty muscled up, and compared to my brother's friend, I was thinking, what is my brother's friend doing? He's gonna get beat up by this big bodybuilder dude, what is he doing? And my brother's friend's like calling him out and saying, come outside so we could fight, I'll whoop you, and everything like that. And I was just a young kid, so I was curious, paying attention, well, what's gonna happen with this, And so they went outside and they started fighting, my brother's friend and that big bodybuilder dude. Next thing you know, my brother's friend hit this dude with so much power it dropped him on the ground. As soon as that guy got on the ground, my brother's friend booted him straight in his chin and just started beating the hell out of this guy. And I was just like blown away, like, dang, I didn't know this was possible. A little skinny guy like that beating up a big bodybuilder guy. But so, muscle ain't everything. It doesn't mean that you can fight just because you got muscle. This dude was a scrapper, and he was for real. So after he ended up beating up that dude, left him bloody in the parking lot, we all jumped in the cars and we all took off. And that was just a normal kind of life that, I was around with my brother and his friends. It was all kinds of hectic stuff, There was even one time I was at the YMCA playing basketball, and another kid my age stole my basketball from me, and he didn't want to give it back. And I told my brothers and them, they says, well, you better do something about it. You better not let him punk you for your basketball. You let him punk you, he's just always going to do it and whatever, And so I went up and I hit the kid in his face, and then he punched me in the stomach. It took the air out of me, and we got in a fight. And next thing you know, there's all these people around. Beat him up. And I was young, like 11 years old, 12 years old, something like that. And then they broke up the fight, and they pulled me out, and we ran, and that was that. No one got in trouble or nothing like that. But it was real weird, And even at a young age like that, my mom would go to work all the time, but she got involved with gambling and bingo when she was like 14 years old. So she had a real heavy gambling addiction that she still hasn't let go to this day. And so she would get off work 5 or 6 or whatever, and then she would just go straight to bingo most of the time. And bingo would last from like 6 to 10. Or sometimes they'd have a midnight another session, so it'd go from 10 to 1. So sometimes we wouldn't even see her all night, We might see her here and there, but, right after work she would go to bingo and we wouldn't see her. So me and my brother, we had the house to ourselves, at a young age. And when my brother was in his teenage years and I was, like 8 or 9 years old, I would go to sleep, when my mom would leave, like at 6 or 7 or whatever, and she wouldn't be back till 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. And sometimes I'd wake up, like, I'd go to sleep and it's just me and my brother sitting in the living room, and I would go to sleep because I was a young kid. Next thing you know, I'd wake up to all this noise going on in the house, and I was like, what the hell's going on? I would look around, and there'd be like 30 or 40 people in my mother's house. And the music was all turned up, hip-hop music, and the girls all over the place, and people shooting craps, and people dancing, drinking 40s, and doing shots, smoking weed, just whatever, people having sex. And I was just a young little kid, I didn't know what to think, but this is what I grew up around, so it's just like, what do? You just try to hang out and be cool with them. So it was kind of an interesting lifestyle, and when I was probably in 6th grade, people started testing me a lot in elementary school. They would be trying to fight me all the time. And I learned from my brother and all his friends that if someone wants to fight you, just fight them. Because you can't show them that you're a punk, Even if you get beat up or whatever, it's better than, turning down the fight and acting like a punk, So the guys I was going to school with would take advantage of this, and they started setting up fights and started doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I remember, I almost had like a different fight. Every Friday I had a different fight. Different kid wanted to fight me. This was in elementary school in 6th grade. A different kid would want to test me like every Friday. And I would have to fight him, just because, I had to live up to my name and that I wasn't a punk. And then also I had some of my other buddies setting these fights up on purpose just because they want to see it. So I was fighting all these kids in school, just because, I had to. And the guy that was setting up all these fights, his name was Steve. And it was real funny though, because I would fight all these kids in 6th grade, and he was setting up all these fights for me, and he was like one of my friends, so-called friends. But it got to a point where even though I was doing all the fighting and I was fighting all these kids, he was one of my friends, but he intimidated me. So I knew something wasn't right. He tried to act like he was the boss, and he would call the shots, and he was the leader of our group or whatever when I was doing all the fighting. And he was bigger than me and everything. But, there come a time and a point in 6th grade where I just got tired of him, period. And I ended up punking out, and I dropped out of that school, and I went to a different elementary school in Cheyenne. Miller. It's called Miller School. And so I went to Miller School. And it's crazy that I would say this because, one minute I'm fighting all these different kids and holding my own and not being a punk. But then I'm punking out to one of my friends that I'm hanging out with, and I'm, intimidated and scared by him. It's really crazy. So when my grandpa found out that I got intimidated by this kid and I moved schools and everything, my grandpa did not dig that at all. He was not putting up with that. And he's like, what's your problem? Why are you going to go to a different school? And I told him the reason about this kid and everything, and he's all, well, you need to fight this kid and show him who's boss and show him you ain't afraid of him, because you can't be putting up with this, just running from school to school because you're afraid, And I was like thinking in the back of my head, like, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I'm still scared. I don't know what to do. And I was 12 years old, so I just kind of brushed it off like, well, whatever, I'll just try to stay away from this kid or whatever. So, and at 12 years old, I was already smoking weed. I was already, drinking alcohol, stuff like that at 12 years old, early age. And so 12 years old in 6th grade. So that summer right after 6th grade, I was getting ready to go in junior high. And me and my friend Curtis, we would drive our bikes all over town, stuff like that. And he says, let's go to the west side, go play some basketball. And so we went over to the west side of town, went to go play some basketball. Well, it was a court over by Steve's house. That's where Steve lived on the west side, the dude who I was afraid of. And I was telling my friend, I don't know, that's by Steve's house, I don't know. He said, oh, don't worry, nothing will happen to you, don't worry, let's just go play some ball. So we went over there on the west side, go play some basketball. And we're playing on the court for about a good 20 minutes or so. And guess who walks up? Here comes Steve walking up. Steve Wilcox. And I was like, oh man, here we go, I says, I don't like this dude. I don't like him whatsoever. I'm actually intimidated of him. And I started getting adrenaline right there. And my friend Curtis says, you know what, dude? He says, you just gotta fight him. Just fight this dude. And show him you ain't no punk. Show him you're not afraid of him or anything. And I was like, wow, whatever. And I really didn't want to fight this dude. I want to get on my bike and leave. I didn't want to fight him. Didn't want to do none of that. But Curtis talked me into it. So I said, all right, man. So Steve was up for it. I was up for it. And we started fighting. Next thing you know, I punched Steve in the mouth. He dropped on the ground. And I started getting on top of him, just beating the hell out of him. And I beat him up, dude. And it's just like, after that fight, you know, we were cool. We shook hands and we were friends. We smoked a joint, whatever. And that was it. And I walked away from that thinking like, I can't believe I moved schools and ran from this dude when I just beat him up so easily and stood my ground. You know, but that's how things are when you're a kid. Sometimes you get involved in stupid stuff like that, and sometimes you're not sure of yourself, or sometimes when fighting is not the right thing to do, sometimes you have to do it, you know, just to stand your ground and show them you're not a punk and everything else. So after that, I'm getting ready to go into 7th grade, and that's junior high in Wyoming starts at 7th grade. And so I'm getting ready to go into 7th grade, right? And right as soon as I'm getting ready to go into 7th grade, my Uncle Talleray gets out of prison, you know, and we had a big party at my grandma's house. My grandma moved from Phoenix, Arizona back to Cheyenne, Wyoming when I was about probably 12 years old. And she bought a house in Wyoming. But, you know, her and my grandpa, they weren't together. They were separated, done their own thing or whatever. But she moved back. But Ronnie, my youngest uncle, he stayed out there in Phoenix, Arizona. He started a paint company, and he started running that paint company out there in Phoenix. But she moved back by herself. So she moved back and bought a house and everything like that. And so when I was 12 and when I was 13, you know, that's when my Uncle Talleray got out of prison. So he gets out of prison, and I didn't even know him growing up, because when he went to prison, you know, I was a really young kid. You know, I didn't even really know, you know, or nothing like that. He was in there for about a good 10 years, you know, so I was right around 3 years old or whatever like that when he went to prison. So he got out of prison. He was a pretty big guy. He was all muscled up and everything. Stood about 6 foot tall, and you know, he was, I really got to meet him and understand who he was as a person, you know, and he's a real cool dude, you know. I had a lot of respect for him. I still do have a lot of respect for him, and I always will. He was real business savvy. He had the talk of gab, you know. He knew how to talk really well. And I didn't find this out till later on in life, but the reason he went to prison is because he was a contractor. He would get like roofing jobs, concrete jobs, whatever, construction jobs. He would bid them for these people, and he ended up getting involved in drugs and stuff like that later on. And he wouldn't do the jobs. He would just leave. You know, he'd take these people's money and leave halfway through the job, whatever, and just leave. You know, and they filed charges for fraud on him, and that's what put him in prison for 10 years. So when he got out, you know, of prison, you know, he started up another business, you know, and he wanted to do everything right. And I was like, well, this is pretty cool, you know. My uncle's here, and I get to finally meet him and understand who he is as a person and stuff like that. So he was real cool, down to earth, you know. Never had a temper or anything like that. But I always heard a lot of stories about him, you know. I heard he was a person you didn't want to mess with. That, you know, I guess he would run every morning for 5 miles a morning. He would practice boxing a lot, and he was a big guy. And, you know, I heard old stories that, like, people back in the day would test him, and he would just clean their clock, you know, or there's even times where, way back when he was strung out on drugs and stuff like that before he ever went to prison, Like he tried to live up in Seattle or something like that, and he would go around and ask people for money, and if they didn't want to give him money, he would just beat them up and take their wallet, you know. And it's crazy I say that, but you know, we all do stupid stuff in life. So when I was 13 years old, I was going to junior high, and he started renovating one of my grandfather's properties because, like I said, my grandfather had a bunch of houses, apartment complex. And so my grandfather gave him one of the houses and says, you could stay there, just help me fix it up, stuff like that. So my uncle would fix it up, and at the same time, he was trying to run his business on the side. Well, he would hire me on some of these jobs, so I would, you know, I'd work for him, and I'd also work for my grandpa too, you know, so I was making money. I was making money at an early age. I started making money with my grandpa around 10 years old, you know, doing construction jobs, just whatever odds and ends I could do for my grandfather, and then my uncle too. And I kind of had a little hustle, you know, when I was 13 years old. So I'd get off of school and I would go and I'd work for my uncle like 4 hours a night, sweeping the shop, hanging drywall, just whatever I can do, you know. And he only paid me like $5 an hour, but that's pretty good money. Back in '96, you know, when you're 13 years old, you know, you can't complain unless you're making something. And especially when I grew up in a poor household, you know, that's a lot better than nothing. So, you know, so I was doing that, and then even at work, at school, I was hustling too. So I was making money with my uncle, and then at school, I had a hustle for selling gum. So I'd go to like Kmart or whatever and buy a big old pack of Bubblicious gum, and it had four little packages in there for like, I think I spent like $1. So I'd get 4 packages of Bubblicious for $1, and then I'd take those to school and turn around as a hustle, and I'd sell them for $1 a pack. So I spent $1, but I'd make $3 profit. And this is working out pretty good. So I did this for a few months, and every day sell easily 8 packs of gum or whatever. So I was turning a little profit here, saving some money on the side, working for my uncle, stuff like that. But that's like the beginning of the 7th grade. And then turn around in the 8th grade, you know, like I said, I smoked weed when I was like 12 years old, so I was already smoking here and then, but I wouldn't smoke with my uncle or nothing like that. And they smoked weed, you know, even though he's out of prison, he still smoked weed with my Uncle Daniel. So my Uncle Daniel was there in town, my Uncle Ronnie was in Phoenix, and my Uncle Gary was working for the railroad, so my Uncle Gary wasn't dealing with no drugs or nothing like that. But my Uncle Daniel, he would have a couple beers and smoke some joints, and my Uncle Telleray, he was strictly just, you know, smoke a little bit of weed at the end of the night or during the day on his break, but the rest was business, you know. Whatever, he didn't drink or nothing like that, no hard drugs or nothing like that. So you know, and he didn't, I would never smoke with like I knew my uncle and them would be smoking, but I didn't smoke around them, and I don't even think they even knew that I smoked weed. It was just like me and my friends at the time, you know, because I was real young, and they didn't want to promote that on me anyways. So this is 13 years old. As time went on, I remember, you know, we used to get real heavy into smoking weed and also drinking, even around 13, 14 years old. And I met a dude when I went to the 8th grade in junior high. His name was Josh Pandulo. And we became buddies and everything like that. He was actually from Southside School, and he moved up to my school, which is McCormick Junior High. And we started hanging out, and we were kind of thugged out back then. I used to slick back my hair, put 3 flores in it. 3 flores is what they used to call it. Wear hairnets, Ben Davis, Dickies, all that kind of stuff, you know. And we were kind of thugged out little gangsters.